Welcome to another podcast from Finance Connect, where, with the sponsorship of Alpha, we explore topics that are relevant to the European asset finance industry. I'm Richard O'Donoghue, and today we're going to discuss the challenges facing European manufacturing and how servitisation, or outcome-based models, may be a way to compete with lower-cost imports. To help me explore this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Jennings of ANSENresearch. Paul is one of our industry's most established practitioners and has just published his first book titled Transforming Products into Services, which is as good a definition of servitisation as any other. Paul, great to have you on the podcast, and thanks for joining me today.
Richard, it's good to be on this podcast. Thank you very much for your invitation.
It's a real pleasure. And one of the things I always do when we have a guest on a podcast is to look at their LinkedIn profile. And yours is particularly unique because I don't think I've ever come across a LinkedIn profile where somebody worked at the same company, in your case JCB, for 43 years. You're going to have to tell us a little bit about why you were at JCB so long and what you've been doing since you left.
Well, yeah, it's quite a long story. I agree. 43 years service. I joined Barclays Bank as a sort of junior clerk many moons ago, and then spent the time working at one of their major customers, JCB. JCB Finance is a joint venture between, and has been for years, between NatWest Bank and JC Bamford Excavators. And I've enjoyed my time. It's been a great career. I ended up being CEO for 11 years and really enjoyed the challenge that the success of JCB provided. People have asked me in the past, Richard, why did you work at the same place for so long? And my answer is I wasn't at the same place for all that time. It changed probably every 5 years. Mm-hmm. So it's been quite a good roller coaster.
Then you moved on and you now have your own research business. And also, I know you work with universities. You're a visiting lecturer. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's been a really interesting thing for me. JCB Finance, we were interested in amalgamation of repair and maintenance and extended warranty, insurance, all sorts of products to make buying a JCB or acquiring a JCB a good experience and a one-stop shop. And to that effect, I've been working with the Advanced Services Group, which is a commercial spin-off of Aston University. And the topic that they deal with is servitisation and outcome-based contracts, advanced services. And that fell really into the lap of what we were attempting to do. And so I had quite a long relationship with, if I may call them, ASG. And when I retired, they very kindly offered me a position of visiting professor at Aston University, which I was quite excited about, and then joined them on a consultancy basis to bring a financial aspect to what they do with manufacturers across the world, Europe and the UK in particular.
What do they do with manufacturers?
Well, they're trying to, in fact, they're a recognized, really well-recognized consultancy and themselves across the world, both academically and commercially, in trying to convince manufacturers to move from just sell some gear, sell some parts, and maybe get some service contracts signed up, to really amalgamating all of that and providing the customer with an advanced service, which goes far beyond merely providing a product and talking about features and benefits. But it takes an awful lot of strategic change to put that into place. And so they consult with, there's probably 40 different organizations at the moment they're consulting with globally to help them put this sort of regime into place.
Is this partly connected with what we're seeing? You know, I don't want to call it the demise of Western manufacturing, but I guess we're seeing a trend and have been where manufacturing is really taking place in China and other Southeast Asian nations. Is this seen as a way to protect manufacturing from cheaper imports?
I think that's one of the main benefits. It probably didn't start off that way, but it is a defensive measure and also a growth measure. Global manufacturing has shifted from west to east over the last 20 years in particular, and there has been quite an impact on UK and EU, the industrial base in our domestic area that threatens the industrial base, the supply chain, its resilience, and ultimately jobs. And there's been an erosion of GDP, which is quite concerning. So finding a new battlefield to do your trade and sell your goods has got to be a better idea than trying to just compete on price and features and benefits.
And one of the suggestions I think that the ASG group has, and you have, is that we move to servitisation, or I think you sometimes refer to it as outcome-based contracts. Let's start with the basics. What is servitisation or an outcome-based contract?
Yeah, well, servitisation is the method by which a company would change from merely retailing goods to actually converting itself to selling a service which involves its goods. An outcome-based contract is probably one of the things that is coming out of all of that effort, and it's a contract that links a service provider's payment directly to the final results achieved, rather than the hours worked or tasks completed. There's lots of different definitions, but that's one that I particularly like. I've got an example if you'd like me to show
Please.
to demonstrate. If I'm a fruit juice manufacturer, I've got a recipe, I've got suppliers that provide me with the raw materials to make my fruit juice. I've got great marketing expertise. I control the chilled distribution to supermarkets and other stores. But in the middle, I've got this huge pile of machinery that is actually making the recipe happen and is then, in a production sense, filling the packages, filling the bottles, and then I catch that lot at the end when the product is properly packed. And I don't want to be, as a juice manufacturer, responsible for the hygiene, the productive activity of that machinery, and the energy consumption. Whereas if I'm a machinery manufacturer, I might just say that's the machine and there it is, and we'll train your operators. Actually, you've got to go further than that now in the modern world. Provide the machinery, look after the hygiene, look after the energy consumption, try and reduce the energy consumption throughout that process, provide staff, use data sets, telematics, AI to try and help that customer. But to help the customer, you've got to know exactly what they're trying to achieve. And so that binds you both more closely together. Then underpinning all that lot is the financial arrangement that actually makes that happen, which is key to the process.
I mean, this is a topic that people have been talking about in our industry for many years, probably 10 or 15 years. It comes up repeatedly at conferences, but it doesn't seem to have gained the traction we would have anticipated. Why do you think that is?
I agree with you, and it does seem to be intractable. However, I do know of some really, really good cases working alongside ASG. But one of the things I think there's reluctance on the part of financiers to move away from traditional funding methods. I'd really like my colleagues in the asset finance industry in the UK and throughout Europe to better recognise recurring revenues to secure themselves rather than the equipment, the OEM equipment itself, and figure out new methods of securitization away from what I would call our grandparents' HP and leasing, to come up with a new ecosystem that aids financiers and customers and manufacturers to put these pieces together better. There's been one or two attempts, but I think there's always been this, we need a hell or high water clause in our contract, which really destroys the whole emphasis of guaranteed uptime and measuring payment by outcomes. And then manufacturers recognise what servitisation can do to rid the business of competing on price or features and benefits, and actually design products for outcomes and create a new battlefield that's difficult to replicate by, shall we say, low-cost foreign imports. And that's really, I think, where the traction and emphasis should be placed in those three areas.
If you think about maybe consumption models or kind of some of these outcome-based models that perhaps we've seen in the technology industry, it's largely been driven by the manufacturers being prepared to take risks, the likes of a HPE or a Dell, for example.
Yes.
Do you think that's going to be the same in the broader industry? Is it really the manufacturers have to step up here, and then you get the fintechs and the financing companies stepping in to support?
I think that's a definite move in that there will be risk transfer, but that risk transfer, it does enable novel contracts and novel products to be put into the marketplace that then protect the manufacturer from this ultra competition being faced and will get worse on cash price and features and benefits. We can no longer say that the products that are coming in from low-cost manufacturers are generally poor quality, because obviously they're not. So there has to be this new area that is taken on board, and assuming more risk than in the past beyond, say, a 12-month warranty or even an insurance-backed extended warranty, it does actually go to the performance of your machine. If you have confidence in your product, surely you should be able to back it and guarantee some things beyond, manufacturer problems with warranties, equipment warranties.
If therefore manufacturers play a key role in this and in taking on perhaps risks that they haven't taken on in the past, besides the argument that this allows them to offer a differentiator versus low-cost manufacturers, what other arguments would you make to a manufacturer to say you should be prepared to look at this and get into servitisation models or outcome-based contracts?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's one that I've been deeply involved in over the last 2 or 3 years via Aston University and the Advanced Services Group. They've been working on a project or a 2-year study funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, looking at manufacturers over 16 years worth of information and data from 700 manufacturers. This was UK, 400 in-depth pieces of analysis with 400 different companies, and then 70 deep dive interviews. It was called the Big Business Case for Servitisation, and the report was launched at Make UK, the Manufacturers Association in London in November. And the findings were that shifting from selling standalone physical products to delivering integrated outcome-based advanced services builds such things as predictable recurring revenue, deepens customer loyalty, and improves overall manufacturing productivity. I've got some numbers if you would like them, Richard.
Yeah, definitely.
Firms with more advanced services see an average of 7.8% profit increase. Increasing service revenue, and this is a key one, by 5% leads to an average of 9% increase in total profit. Imagine trying to achieve that 9% increase in total profit by simply putting your prices up of your goods. It wouldn't work. Increasing service revenue improves productivity by around 10% across the business. The UK and Europe is screaming for better productivity, and this is one way of doing it. And 46% of firms said that their customers benefit most from productivity gains driven by services. So their customers are receiving benefit as well. That's an important link. I love the idea of a manufacturer being concerned not just of its customers, but its customers' customers, because that's where the outcome actually gets portrayed. But that means knowing your customer far more deeply than selling some gear, selling some parts, and maybe selling some service contracts. So there is a dynamic, a huge benefit, according to the research, which was meticulously done, where moving towards servitisation creates financial and productivity benefits for manufacturers. But we still need funders to play their part in this ecosystem far more than perhaps we are at the moment.
Now, a quick word about our sponsors, Alpha. As equipment finance evolves and new business models emerge, having the right technology partner is critical. This is where Alpha comes in. Their SaaS platform, Alpha Systems, provides end-to-end functionality for originations, servicing, and collections, helping finance providers modernize operations, improve efficiency, and adapt to the changing needs of our industry. Find out more at alphasystems.com. That's ALFA systems.com. So would you argue that manufacturers are ready to embrace servitization, and the challenge is getting the funders and fintechs to work alongside them? Or what would you say is the state of readiness among the three participants?
I would say it's less ready than it needs to be, given the progress of penetration into European and British markets by low-cost manufacturers. We must find another way, and I don't think it's wrong to say the penny drops or whatever, but I don't think that there is a preparedness or enough knowledge about transforming into products, into services. It's probably about now. I'd like to mention my book as well, Richard, if I may.
Of course you may.
I retired in 2022 from full-time work at JCB Finance. I thought, how can I preserve my experience for myself, for starters, and perhaps for the benefit of the others, about the real change that needs to take place? So I wrote this book, Transforming Products into Services, Time to Cross the Rubicon, because I think it is time to take risk and move towards this new servitized environment. There are risks in staying as we are, and I think that pivot now has gone to the point where there are more risks staying as we are than there are risks in moving to servitization. And in the book, I'm asking financiers to recognize recurring revenues and figure out the new methods of securitization. And as I mentioned before, fintech come up with solutions, and manufacturers recognizing what servitization can do. There's my own personal experience in the book. There's SG experience there, lots of links and information. And also there's a fictional business. I don't want to talk about where I've worked for 43 years.
Sure.
I want to talk about a fictional business actually based in Alsace. It's a manufacturer. And we go through the dynamic of a working group trying to influence strategy within that business in a way that I know it takes place within manufacturing businesses. So I just hope that there is a message there that will convince all three parties that they need to get together somehow and come up with a good formula in the UK and Europe about how to do this and why to do this.
And I think it's interesting, Paul, that you've mentioned, getting together, because we often talk here in Finance Connect about collaboration, partnerships, connections, and it seems maybe that's the piece that's missing, that we've all, whether we're financiers, whether we're fintechs, whether we're manufacturers, we're all trying to do things in isolation rather than perhaps coming together and working jointly on a solution.
I think that's the case, and I'll be a little bit provocative here, if I may. Is it just an easy solution to fund Chinese and Southeast Asian products than actually find a solution for domestic manufacturers and work together and collaborate there? Is it easier just to fund what's coming into the country? The EU and China now, the EU has a trade deficit with China running at 350 billion euros. They're trying all sorts of methods to limit that with, for instance, the low-value parcel levy has been scrapped, trade probes have been launched, stricter customs enforcement and local sourcing measures. Whereas the US has made a completely different route. And of course, that's been the blunt instrument of tariffs. And that's also causing Europe with difficulties because product is now diverting from the US market and into Europe. So tariffs are causing an impact which goes beyond protecting the US. It's actually causing big issues with the EU.
Do you think, just when you mentioned that and the trade deficit, do you think there's any intention or interest at a governmental level to advance these discussions and look more towards outcome-based contracts? Are you seeing anything like that in any of Europe or in the UK?
Well, I was glad to see that the Big Business Case for Servitisation report was launched at Make UK, the Manufacturers Association, which is a lobbying firm, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
But I also tried my best at dealing with people in government, and they said, may we refer you to the Labour Party's industrial strategy document, and that was that. So I'm not sure that government is best placed or is quite understanding what needs to be done to compete with a low-cost, high-quality competitor.
And I think that's the interesting point, that we previously spoke to Alessia Lombardo from DLL, and again, she mentioned that they are now willing to fund Chinese imports, for want of a better term, because they are good quality. And I think in the past, there was a perception of it's low cost, but it's low quality, and therefore leasing companies perhaps weren't interested in funding them. But today, they are.
Well, there's also a challenge of the content of intangible value within equipment nowadays, as we well know. The car industry, car funding industry is grappling with how much of this car is actually the value of the car and how much is the value of the battery, how much is the value of the IT and software within the car. Ultimately, it'll be what about the automated driving as well and the services that relate to that. This is an indication of what is coming down the track for the rest of equipment. The amount of data, the profusion of data, and then ultimately proper information that's coming off OEM equipment nowadays is something that should offer up some kind of security, different type of security to funders. But it is the easy option, I think, to just fund equipment that comes into the country. The same is happening, as I perceive it anyway, with car dealerships. why sell European in the UK? Why sell European makes if I can get BYD to fund my new showroom and help me sell cars? It's a bit of a capitulation, if you ask me.
I might use a different term, but I think now that I've mentioned DLL, I suppose I should say as well, they've been one of the advocates of servitisation and outcome-based contracts.
Yes.
So they are trying to take probably a longer-term view. But if their customers want imports, why wouldn't they fund it? It makes complete sense. But you earlier mentioned energy, and I wanted to touch on this because Europe seems to be at the forefront of circular economy initiatives. I want to get your thoughts on whether that could become a differentiator for European manufacturing.
I think it definitely could, and I'm seeing it in various quarters. It's part of the net zero objectives, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
And net zero, we haven't really mentioned that, but stakeholder activism, in my opinion, is more powerful than, shall we say, government policy nowadays on net zero outcomes. And I think if manufacturers recognise the opportunity to monitor, report, maintain products for customers and their customers that reduce energy consumption and emissions and waste throughout the useful working lives of products, I think there's a major opportunity to focus on those elements, and also the remanufacture and repower of products over time, which then comes back to your point about the circular economy. And I'm seeing more of this remanufacture and repower day by day. I do watch LinkedIn quite a bit, and I, whether it's my own echo chamber or not, I'm seeing a lot more of it.
Yeah, and I think we've had people in the past talking from an IT point of view about the ITAD business and the growth in that, which is a classic case of circular economy.
Yes.
And it's interesting because, again, it seems to fit very neatly into a servitisation model. It's a natural complement or a natural service that you would offer within a servitisation model.
It is, yes. And that is starting. I'm seeing good examples of repowering products, for instance, from diesel engines on buses to electric. And so I'm quite hopeful that we'll see a lot more of that, which will help the atmosphere in different cities, for instance, away from diesel to battery, without buying a new, splashing out on a brand new bus.
And again, as we're recording this, Europe is facing unprecedented heat waves. We've got fires, etc. I mean, the whole topic of electrification and climate change is top of mind for everybody at this point. So I think this is a very topical sort of podcast to have around circular economy and how servitisation can support that. One final thing I want to touch on, which I have very little familiarity with because I've never really worked in the kind of manufacturing heavy goods side of the business. But hydrogen power, I know, is a passion of yours. Talk a little bit about that and where you see that going.
It is something I'm passionate about, not just recently, but for probably 30 or 40 years. It's got many detractors using hydrogen, and I understand why, but I don't think we need a cultish commitment to make battery electric the only option. It isn't like VHS and Betamax, and one will be a winner. I think there will be different types of energy used in all manner of industries and goods, but particularly the hard-to-abate applications like heavy haulage, heavy construction, heavy agricultural equipment, buses, steel making. I see has been a big becoming to be an off-taker of hydrogen instead of coal. But sometimes electric batteries, they have range difficulties, as we know, deficiencies. Charging times are a lot longer than filling up with a tank of hydrogen, for instance. And consumption of natural resources to make the batteries in the first place is not necessarily very pretty. But in the UK and probably throughout Europe, there's no national battery energy storage capability. There's lots of talk of battery farms, but I don't think in a nationwide scale it's going to be the answer. Zero emission hydrogen, the only thing that comes out of that combustion is steam. There are different types of hydrogen. There's green hydrogen, there's grey hydrogen, there's blue, there's pink. Depends how the hydrogen has been created. Green hydrogen will be using, for instance, electricity coming from turbines, and so it's green. Grey is splitting natural gas and doesn't really improve CO2 position. Blue is carbon sequestration, and pink would be derived from using nuclear reactors to create hydrogen. But I particularly favour the outlook for green hydrogen. Why use hydrogen in these bigger, heavy construction and agricultural machines? It's about power, the power dynamics of some of these 20 or 30 ton excavator. I know some brands have experimented with batteries in these. But you'd need a 10-ton battery in a 20-ton excavator. And how long would it take to recharge that? Fast, maybe, if you've got great grid supply to where you're working. But a lot of the time, excavators are not working where electricity grid nodes are. So you need something that is portable. Diesel's been the ideal fuel in that regard. But hydrogen is portable. It takes minutes to fill a machine and then get it working again. And its power output and the range of power outputs is compatible to diesel. If you try and use a big machine that's digging a big hole, pulling up the boom with the bucket, 3 tons, 4 tons of soil or whatever, and moving it and stopping and then doing the process again, a diesel engine revs up and then revs down, whereas electricity tends to prefer a more stable, consistent execution. There was a headline the other day, I think it was the Telegraph, that said, "Glut of wind farm power adds £1 billion to household energy bills." This related to curtailment charges, where we pay the operators of wind turbines, particularly in Scotland, to stop generating electric because the grid can't take it. And yet we're importing either gas or electric from the continent in the UK. So wind overcapacity could be used to create stable hydrogen, in my opinion. That £1 billion could cover the capital cost of 1,000 serious electrolyzers, machines that create hydrogen and generate hydrogen for sale. So it's not just creating redundancy in those turbines, it's creating productivity in those turbines rather than pay to shut down.
It's
sorry, you can.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, and similar in Ireland, where in the first 6 months of the year, about a third of our electricity was generated by wind. But again, we are curtailed because of restrictions on the grid, as are many countries that use wind.
Yeah.
So I think you've put forward a great advocacy for hydrogen, and it's certainly something, I think maybe in Finance Connect we talk about a little bit more, because it's a topic that we probably haven't touched on in the past. And not only is it great from an environmental point of view, but also it creates huge financing opportunities, which we should all be looking for as well. I want to finish off just going back to where we started and 43 years in the asset finance industry with JCB, and now still connected to the industry. For younger people who are listening to this, what career advice would you give them?
It's a good question, and I've loved the industry and the people that I've worked within for so long. And I think provided you're prepared to be enthusiastic about what you do and work hard at it and be honest as you go along, those 3 attributes mean you'll do well in the asset finance market. There are plenty. This is a great time of change, and I did regret retiring in 2022, but then I'm old. And so retirement meant that the younger people would obviously take it on, but it's such an exciting time of transition because of net zero and because of the dynamics in the marketplace that we find ourselves in. And I just regret not having another 10 or 15 years to participate in it. So my enthusiasm, I hope, is coming over to encourage people to get into this great industry that we have in Europe and the UK, and be enthusiastic, be hardworking, and be honest. And I'm pretty sure that you'll go far.
Great advice for any career, and not just in asset finance. And certainly the enthusiasm comes across, and hopefully you will be contributing to the industry, albeit in a different role, over the next 10 or 15 years. It's been a real pleasure, Paul. We actually, in case people weren't aware, don't know each other. So for me, this was a really interesting podcast, talking about what you've done in the past, what you're currently doing, and dipping into some topics like hydrogen power that I wouldn't be very familiar with. I think you've put forward a great argument for manufacturers, financiers and fintechs to get together. And I know your book will explain this in more detail for anybody who wants to go and read about this. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Richard, it's been a great pleasure for me too, and I thank you for inviting me. All the best.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks for listening to this podcast from Finance Connect. When Paul was suggested as a guest, I was doubtful about having another conversation on servitisation. For many years, we were told that servitisation was the future of our industry. However, progress has been really slow, and it's easy to argue that the concept was overhyped. Instead of presenting servitisation as a financial solution, I liked how Paul positioned it as a way in which European manufacturers could compete with low-cost imports, mainly from China. Ultimately, it's unlikely that European manufacturers can out-discount lower-cost imports. So offering a differentiated business model, such as servitisation, may be one way in which to compete. To do that, however, requires manufacturers, finance companies, and technology providers to work together rather than trying to build solutions independently. I've seen a few examples of this level of collaboration, but not at the scale that Paul believes is required. It's a real opportunity for our industry to take the lead and help European manufacturers be more competitive. If you've enjoyed this podcast, look out for future episodes on your preferred platform every few weeks. You can also find all of the past episodes on those platforms. Thanks as always to our sponsors Alpha, and please continue to send us suggestions for future guests and topics. In the meantime, thanks for listening.